the deep dive. So you've brought us this really interesting stack of documents, and they detail not just a religious belief system, but, well, a foundational blueprint for what they're calling a new civilizational pattern.
That's right. I mean, we're talking about foundational charters, doctrinal summaries. They are incredibly detailed. They lay out the whole vision, the mission, the entire legal and moral architecture for this movement.
A movement they call Christendom.
Exactly. And that includes both the spiritual body, the Church of Christendom, and the civic side, the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm.
And we have examples like the community of Shiloh that are trying to put this into practice.
Okay, so this is a huge idea to unpack. Our mission for this deep dive, then, is to really get to the core of it. What's the crucial difference between historical Christendom, the one from the history books, and what these proponents are calling a voluntary, lawful, post-institutional renaissance? Is this actually new?
I think it is, or at least they're arguing that it is. And the distinction is it's all in their definitions.
All right, let's start there then. The sources, they describe the historical version. They say it was a pattern where faith, culture, law, art, all of it, was woven together under a shared moral horizon.
Think cathedrals, guilds, even the legal system, which they say was tempered by mercy.
Right.
And they're very keen to present the ideal outcome of that period as something they call ordered liberty.
Ordered liberty. Okay, what does that mean in this context?
Well, it's a profound idea, really. They define freedom not as the absence of constraint, which is, the modern secular view.
Well, do whatever you want.
Exactly. Instead, they define freedom as the presence of virtue. The idea is that a cohesive moral culture is what actually enables stability and true freedom.
That makes sense in theory, but history, it got messy.
It did. And to their credit, the documents are very honest about why the historical model fractured. They cite corruption, the centralization of power, and just a massive loss of spiritual vitality. They say it led to a state of dormancy. So yeah, they own the failures.
And that's the jumping off point for this new era of Christendom. They seem to spend a lot of time defining it by what it's not.
A lot of time. It is explicitly declared, and this is a direct quote, not an empire, a theocracy, or a nostalgia project. They're clearly trying to get ahead of the criticism that this is just, trying to turn the clock back to the Middle Ages.
But how do you get civilization-level change without the main tool of civilization, which is the state? And that brings us to their core definition. Voluntary, lawful, post-institutional renaissance. Let's break down post-institutional. That's a heavy bit of jargon.
It's the whole game. Post-institutional here means it's non-state dependent. It's decentralized. It relies entirely on non-coercive, voluntary commitment.
So they're rejecting the model where the church needs state power to enforce its rules.
Completely.
That sounds incredibly ambitious, maybe even contradictory. Yeah. How can you build a civilization if you refuse the levers of power?
By flipping the primary source of authority. This whole movement is grounded in one core conviction. Christ is king, not the state. So for them, if that kingship is spiritual, it has to be embodied through excellence, through witness, through service, not through a legal mandate or coercion. The whole shift is from centralized, enforced law to decentralized, embodied morality.
So the strategy is attraction, not legislation.
Yeah.
That leads us right into their mission for renewal. They say faith has to shape culture, but through communities that are, and I'm quoting, so coherent, prosperous, and humane that they become models worth emulating.
Precisely. They sum it up by saying their goal is to be incarnated, not legislated.
Incarnated, not legislated.
Yeah. Their success hangs on the visible quality of life within their Commonwealth. And to do that, they lay out some really demanding principles. Like, look at the economics of it. They insist that prosperity must serve posterity.
So wealth is a trust for future generations.
It's a trust, not a personal possession.
That is a direct challenge to, well, the entire modern corporate structure. Maximizing shareholder value this quarter is the goal.
It's a complete rejection of that, and they try to build it in with moral boundaries. The Charter requires institutions to be bounded by moral law, answering to truth and accountability. They reject things like predatory debt or planned obsolescence. It's an ethical architecture for commerce.
I'm starting to see the scope of this. They have these 5 mission points, and one really stands out. Reintegrate faith, work, and culture, restoring dignity to labor, beauty to the built environment, and meaning to communal life. That's a total rejection of the secular-sacred divide we live in.
It is. It means the sacred has to be found in the ordinary. If labor has dignity, the craft must be excellent. If the environment must have beauty, the architecture can't be some soulless utilitarian box.
So if I were to visit a community like this, I should be able to literally see the difference in the buildings, in the goods they produce.
That's the claim. They see it as a spiritual foundation that informs ethics, not politics. A moral architecture that undergirds economic systems. They're trying to write the rules for society below the level of the state.
Which brings us to the actual plumbing, the structure. The founding charter itself isn't framed as a legal filing. It's a sacred covenant, a compact made before the throne of heaven.
That language tells you everything. The internal rules are viewed with ultimate seriousness, and if you look at the structure of the Church of Christendom, it's defined as a unifying fellowship. It consciously honors the entire lineage of Christian tradition. Title IV calls it a federation of Christian traditions.
And the list of who they invite into this federation is staggering. They name specific Christian houses that can keep their own liturgy and theology. Catholic, Orthodox, Anglican, Reformed, Evangelical, Pentecostal.
And even the Eastern traditions, Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, you're spanning centuries of schism and doctrinal dispute there.
That's the most difficult part of this to believe. How do you mandate unity without imposing uniformity?
They address it head-on in Article 7. The governing principle is unity without tyranny. They explicitly reject sectarian rivalry. The goal is for all these different voices to harmonize into a single holy symphony.
Okay, but how? Practically, how does that work?
Yeah.
These groups have been separated by deep theological chasms for hundreds of years. If there's no central authority enforcing doctrine, what stops it from fracturing over something like, say, the Eucharist?
Well, the documents seem to argue that unity is maintained by prioritizing the shared moral commitment.
The civic mission.
Right, over the historical doctrinal differences. The unifier is the shared belief that Christ is king and the shared commitment to living by this ethic of virtue. They're essentially saying, we have to cooperate to build this thing, even if our specific worship styles differ.
And before we get to that moral code, Title III has this philosophy of the human person. It says, everyone bears the imago Dei inherent dignity, but that dignity comes with duty.
And the duties are very practical, very civic. Things like to protect innocence from corruption, to provide for one's household, and to preside with moral courage and wisdom.
So dignity isn't passive, it's activated through responsibility.
That's the foundation for the whole civilization. Your inherent worth tasks you with governing your little corner of the world righteously. And that sets the stage for the whole operating system.
The moral operating system. And that is Section 4, the ethic of virtue. It's literally described as the law of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and the charter is very clear, a direct quote. These are not suggestions, they are the pillars of a righteous society.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
It is. This moral code is a total OS. It governs everything. They detail a specific list of required Christian virtues: purity, patience, discipline, diligence, generosity, kindness, humility, courage, and love.
And they define themselves just as clearly by what they reject, the moral hazards. They list the 7 ruinous vices: lust, rage, greed, envy, gluttony, sloth, and pride.
And the warning is blunt. Where vice reigns, liberty perishes.
So this sets a very high bar for anyone living there. The documents say the Commonwealth is a sanctuary for Christians and havens for humanity, so you don't have to be a devout believer to enter.
But, and it's a huge but, all residents must uphold this standard of virtue.
Which brings up the question again, how do you enforce that without becoming the coercive theocracy you say you're not?
They try to bridge that gap with a restorative approach. Title V details the method. We rebuke the vice, not the person.
Okay.
They say they reject the spirit of condemnation and embrace the spirit of restoration. So it's tough on the behavior, compassionate toward the person, or that's the goal.
It's a challenging dynamic, though. You can join voluntarily.
Right.
But once you're in, you are consenting to a moral blueprint that shapes everything.
Everything. The documents say this moral code shapes architecture, craft, agriculture, commerce, family life. It's all supposed to be woven into a tapestry of Christian honor. It's a total refusal to delegate culture to secularism.
So to sum this all up, we've analyzed a massive vision for a decentralized, voluntary Christian civilization.
It's rooted in moral law.
It tries to create unity across these historically warring traditions, and it aims to express faith through every single aspect of cultural and economic life.
And the whole goal is to prove that you can have a civilization based on moral excellence and voluntary buy-in rather than state force.
And their public witness relies entirely on that principle.
It does. The sources state they don't preach condemnation or coercion. They trust in the quiet power of embodied virtue, honest self-reflection, and a Christ-like charity.
They say the measure of their faith is not by volume, but likeness.
Exactly. The reflection of their ideals in their daily lives.
It's a powerful conclusion to their charter. They assert that civilization is earned through faithfulness, and that this new Christendom will rise again, not by the sword of conquest, but by the sword of virtue, the shield of truth, and the armor of righteousness.